welcome to our committee room, the CUDs, Communication Union Districts, and our first witness is FX1, Chair of EC Fiber. Welcome.
Thank you very, very much for having me, Madam Chair, and the members of the committee. I'm here to share a little perspective on the history of the internet in Vermont and how we got to CUDs. And it's really been the story of Vermont having to find its own path to the top of the mountain. And I'm here today to say that that mountaintop is finally in reach. You know, Vermont's first internet crisis was when we didn't have local numbers for dial-up. Okay, it was like long distance. So Vermonters solved that. They created, ValleyNet got created to what? To provide local phone numbers. SovereignNet got created to provide local phone numbers. So Vermonters solving a Vermont problem. And a decade later, DSL came along. So that was way better than dial-up. But you know what? It was only available within 3 miles of where the phone switch was. So that was limited to bigger towns. And that's the 4-1 you sometimes see in the streets. And right around that same time in the early 2000s, like between 2000 and 2004, cable internet started to be deployed. That's your 25.3. But that was only deployed to the same places where there was DSL, because they would only build where there was population. So at that early stage of the game 20 years ago, Vermonters generally had 2 equally good choices if they were in, the denser areas. Otherwise, so you had Vermonters in a competitive oasis or an internet desert. So by 2004, everyone who was looking at the issue realized that this disparity would grow into a crisis. And a lot of local efforts kicked off. So Burlington Telecom was probably the most notable. And Burlington Telecom gained traction. And the folks at ValleyNet, which had spun out of Dartmouth, suggested that to the Vermont towns that were in its area, that maybe they should band together and follow the same approach that Burlington Telecom had. And so the grassroots organizers in those East Central towns decided to call it EC FiberNet. And they went around with ValleyNet and persuaded 24 towns to vote an identical motion at town meeting in 2008. And that motion said, we're going to sign an interlocal contract to create this provider. Well, then what happened? We were going to borrow $42 million and build the whole network in 2 years. And the signing for that loan down on Wall Street was scheduled at Lehman Brothers 12 days after they went bankrupt. So, we were dead in the water. Then Burlington Telecom got into trouble, and the state passed a law that said towns would not be able to bond. So our next option, towns and put together some kind of a big cooperative bond, that was out the window. So we were really, we had no clear path forward. And then in 2009, the federal government gave Vermont $110 million to spend. And, we asked for part of that. And the state basically said, that is the craziest idea we ever heard. No, it's not going to work. That'll never work. And so that 110 mostly went to VTEL, which did a very good thing. They ripped out all their copper for their telephone company and they replaced it with fiber. So that section of Vermont got the 100 world-class broadband going. And there was another $40 million in there that got spent on putting up the cell towers all around the state. And that was going to solve the rest of the world broadband crisis. But it didn't really work because of the topography, because when the leaves come on the trees, the signals get disrupted. And so we all thought it was going to work. It didn't work. Anyway, in 2010, 2011, John Roy and Stan Williams, they both put in about $500,000, and John Roy set up this amazing scheme that was all authorized under the Securities and Exchange Commission rules, where we issued $2,500 private placement promissory notes. And we had 400, over the course of the next 4 years, 450 individuals in our district bought $7.5 million worth of those notes. And so that's how we got funded. We never got a dime from the state in the form of grant. We never got money from the federal government in the form of the grant, nothing. By 2014, we had been in business for 3 years. We had audited financials for each of those years. The financials showed that we could repay the debt, no problem. And these are all the things that bankers want to see when they issue municipal bonds. So we went to a private investment bank that did municipal bonds, and they were like, "This is great. This is terrific. There's one problem. Our risk analysts don't know what an interlocal contract in Vermont is. And why are you guys not a sewer district?" So in 2015, we came to the state and we had drafted the law that is now on the books that allows for the creation of communication union districts. And all the member towns of EC Fiber got off the interlocal contract bus and got on the communication union district bus. And we went from having an LLC that was governed by the interlocal contract to having a special purpose municipality. Same level of municipality, as a town, all the same kind of powers, except it doesn't have taxing power, but we can issue municipal revenue bonds. And on January 1st, 2016, all the assets of the LLC were transferred to the district. And 10 weeks later, we issued $8.5 million in municipal revenue bonds. We paid off half of the original investors, and we started aiming to build 300 miles a year. By that time, 2015, the broadband crisis had really become visible. So DSL was able to reach further, but it wasn't fast enough anymore. There was too much happening on the internet. And cable still wasn't reaching 25% of locations. And the LTE towers, the VTEL towers, they were not delivering to everyone as it was hoped. So in 2019, the state put some money into spurring the development of more CUDs, because EC Fiber came to your predecessor committee and said, we really need some adjustment in the pole attachment rules, because there are finger pointing contests going on between the electric companies and the phone companies, and it's delaying our ability to build out. And the reaction of the legislature was, you're doing what? You're serving thousands of people in these rural towns? How do we not know about this? And I was like, well, we've just been doing our thing, thank you for the CUD law, but we've just been at it. And the reaction was like, we'll give you those rule changes, but what do we need to do to spur more CUDs to be created? And so that was Act 79 in 2019. So that was actually the third piece of the puzzle for establishing this path to the top of this mountain. And that effort resulted in, like, Rob Fish got hired to go around and help towns figure out how to set up CUDs. And there was some money that was put up so that the CUDs could do the feasibility studies. And 9 months later, the pandemic hit, and the CARES relief money that came in allowed for more money to go into these efforts for resiliency planning. And then in 2021, ARPA passed. And in 2021, Act 71 took that ARPA money, put it into the Vermont Community Broadband Fund, and the broadband board is now getting that money spent. So it's been a long climb, but we're way up this mountain now. Okay, we're way up here. We can see the summit as we climb, and it's really important to understand that trail has been laid out by the state in 4 acts starting in 2014 with saying that 100 service, fiber-based service was the mountaintop we wanted to climb, and the CUDs, et cetera. So, but what is on the summit? Next slide, please. So the top of the mountain is when all of these lines are blue. Okay, these blue lines are where fiber service is in the state right now. And down here in the southern part of the state, by and large, this is VTEL. And this area up here is EC Fiber. You see that Consolidated has done a lot of work around Montpelier and Barry. You're all people here now have a real choice between the cable company and Sirius Broadband. Same as now a lot of the folks in the bigger towns in the EC Fiber district, they have real competition at the highest levels. You've got Burlington Telecom over here. You've got and Franklin Telephone has been replacing their copper with fiber. TDS is going to replace all of their copper with fiber down here in this area. So there's a path forward, and that is where we're going.
We have a question from
Sure.
Representative Smith.
Thank you. Have you ever heard of the Northeast Kingdom?
Certainly.
It doesn't look it. Is there going to be more blue up in that area in
Absolutely.
the not too distant future?
There are 10 CUDs now. One of them is NEK Broadband, and you are going to be hearing from Krista Shute. She's going to be
Good.
telling you all about NEK Broadband after I get done
So
tapping at you.
there will be blue there.
Oh, the whole state. That's the mountaintop.
All right.
Not
Thank you.
not a piece.
Thank you.
Not all those lines are going to be blue. When all those lines are blue, we'll be happy. I'll go away.
Sounds good. Thank you.
All right. So now,
You don't need to go away. I didn't mean that.
so next slide, please. So given this historical background, I would suggest that the main takeaway for you guys is that because of our geography and population, it's really difficult for the phone and cable companies to build a business case for investing in the entire state. And the state doesn't have the resources to just go and do it. But Vermonters, grassroots Vermonters figured out a way to get it done. And 8 years after we got started, the state took notice and decided that, wait, this is a strategy that we can apply in the whole state. And so with all of the pandemic related funding, it's suddenly become considerably easier to see the way forward, right? Because when the CUDs were first getting started up and I was telling them, well, maybe you can't get to the bond market right away, but you can do these private placement promissory notes. It was like, when legitimately so, because that was a big stretch. But now it's going to be much, much easier. And I believe that you can all be assured that this path has really been the product of long 15 years of work, a lot of practical testing of these ideas, and it's shown to be true. Next slide, please. So I chair the governing board. Oh, you can have the first slide, please. I'm sorry, just keep going. So yeah, there we go. Okay, so these are the 31 towns that are in the EC Fiber district. The towns that have the green lines in them are the original 23 towns. The ones with no lines right now are the new towns that we added in 2020. The gold lines are in White River Junction and Quechee and Wilder, that part of Hartford. That's under construction right now. When that gets done, we will be done with the original 23 towns. And our mission has always been to bring world-class broadband to every home and business on the grid in our district. And so we're going to finally accomplish that goal sometime in the next few months. And I will invite you all to the golden spike moment when we plug in or we turn on the switch that lights up the last fiber service area. It's going to be a very exciting moment. We are also very concerned. Here's something that I found out last year when we were working on our audit. We have a chart in there that talks about income in towns and so forth. And I dove into the 2019 census data on income. And I did a study, and I was shocked to see that the best predictor of who had our service was the number of households with household income of 50K or more. And that just gave me such a pit in my stomach to realize that the reason why we were not seeing, like 80% penetration after being in a town for 3 years is because of affordability. And so why is there affordability? You would think, well, a municipality and they're borrowing, it should be, cheap enough. But the fact of the matter is it's expensive to build a network like this in rural Vermont. And you don't have as many possible customers. So when you're looking at the price level that will give you enough revenue to pay the staff and to maintain the network and to repay the bonds, you wind up with your lowest price is $72 a month. And that's a lot for people. So, but we're a community run district. It's like the board is like the town select board, and our operator is like the town manager. And in our case, we decided, well, we're generating enough surplus that we can put some money into figuring out this. So we set up equal access to broadband. You're going to be hearing more about that. But the basic idea is that they will find people who can't afford it and get them hooked up with EC Fiber, get them hooked up with the federal $30 a month subsidy, give them an extra $20 a month private subsidy so that their monthly cost goes down to $22. So we may not have taxing power and the ability to, tax and redistribute income that way, but we've got pricing power and we've got a community organization, and we can run this in a way that makes sure that the business works and makes sure that the people who are in our service area, can find a way to afford that service. So I think we've got a great story to tell with what we've done, and we are so delighted for our younger brother and sister siblings who are not going to have to take out loans to go to college. Okay, and we know we're going to have to pay off our student loan. Our bonds, there's no way around it. We're not going to be able to use any of this federal money to get rid of that. But we are excited for how far up the mountain we are. We're excited for how many people are on the road with us. And I really appreciate the opportunity to give you guys this overview of where we've been and where we're going.
Thank you for your testimony. That was great. There may be a couple questions. I was curious about kind of uptake in areas that did have like Comcast or somebody else, another provider.
You know what? We've only just gotten around to really building in areas where we have that competition, because we save those for last. And so it's going to be another year or two before I can give you a real answer on that.
Okay, great. Do other members have questions? Representative.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Flynn, I'm just curious about the subsidies to the less than 50,000 annual household income, the $30 and the 20. Are those grants? Is that a one-time funding or is it permanent? Or how's that program?
Okay, so the $30 a month is the Affordable Connectivity Program. That's a federal program, and people need to register with the federal government, and then they get what's called a national verifier ID. And then with that verifier ID, the service provider identifies them as customers. Like, here's their customer, here's our customer number, here's their national verifier ID. Here's a couple of other pieces of information that further confirms their identity. And then the system goes, okay, they're in. And then the ISP gets a check every month for 30 times however many people are in that. For people who qualify for the equal access to broadband private $20 subsidy, we keep track of them because there's a credit on their bill, and we bill equal access to broadband each month for that, and then they remit it to us. That's how that works. And we're hoping that that model can be perfected and extended to all the CUDs. And EC Fiber's put $250,000 into that effort so far.
Thank you very much.
Very welcome. Thank you.
All right, next we have Ellie de Villiers.
Hi, so I'm Ellie de Villiers. I'm the executive director of Maple Broadband, and I'm the elected chair of VACUDA, which is the Vermont CUD Association. Next slide, Rob, please. So I'm going to talk just a little bit to bridge the gap between what FX has just told you about the history of EC Fiber and how CUDs got started in the States, and pass you over to Krista Shute, who's the executive director of NEK Broadbands, to give a case study, which I think will be very interesting. So I'm going to speak quite briefly. So FX mentioned broadband deserts and internet oases. And so this slide here is showing on the left is Barre and Montpelier, and on the right is Groton and Peacham. And the green indicates that Barre and Montpelier, as you can see, there's fiber running through these towns. Groton and Peacham are internet deserts where there is no broadband. And what's the reason for that? The reason for that is basic economics. This is the same in Vermont as anywhere else in the world. Density builds business cases. It costs only slightly more to build a mile where you have 100 passings than to build a mile where you have 3 passings. So if you look at Montpelier and Barre, they're much more dense in terms of households per mile than Groton and Peacham. It's the same across the states. Next slide, please. So CUDs, as you've heard, we're special purpose municipalities, but at the same time, we're also building sustainable businesses. We have, as you know, we have the luxury of a lot of grant funds enabling us to get a running start. But what we're doing is like any other business that's building broadband infrastructure, we're working to keep our costs as low as possible in whatever ways that means. Good procurements, keeping tight watch on all the money that we spend, trying to maximize the amount of money we're putting into infrastructure versus overheads, and then building service revenues, which means in part building to the people where we are likely to get the highest take rate, which happens to be the people who have terrible or no broadband service right now. So it maps up. So we generate revenues by serving customers, and then obviously this is an example here on the left. This happens to be Cornwall. Oops. Yeah. So this is Cornwall, Vermont Route 30, and this is North Horwell Road. So it's an example of a similar stretch of road. We have to go down the main road of Cornwall to get to the side roads. That's just the nature of the beast. Also happens to be more dense. And it's those dense areas where we're able to pick up customers there, which help us be able to afford to get to the end of the long roads out to the last mile. So in terms of funding and financing, again, we have the luxury of a lot of grant funding, enabling us to get a head start, which is great. But that is not going to solve the problem. There's not grant funding to build to the last mile of every road. And so all the CUDs have the challenge of building as much as we can, building those revenues, but then we have to look at how to finance the last bits. And this is where the trick comes in terms of every dollar we pay on debt service or higher interest rates is a dollar that we are not able to put into building infrastructure or to subsidizing those who need it most. So our trick going forward, one of our big tasks is how do we keep those interest rates down so that we use the capital we have to do what we want to be doing and not paying bankers, essentially. So capital directed to stakeholder benefits, again, as public entities, we don't have to worry about shareholder returns, which again means we can put more money into infrastructure and subsidies for those who need. So we have strong human resources with public accountability. So again, we do need to have strong, capable staffs that are capable of doing all these wonderful things. We have a lot of volunteers, but we can't solely rely on volunteers to keep the trains running. And then, as I mentioned, profits go to completing availability, which is infrastructure, and then increasing affordability, specifically targeted to those in need, as FX talked about. And that together is how we bridge the digital divide. Next slide, please. So this slide here is just meant to give a little bit of context to those who may not be so familiar, because we throw around these terms all the time as though we know what they mean. But obviously we're all used to our home broadband. But if you're not actually living with service, which is 4.1, which is 4 megabits per second down, 1 megabit per second up, or I should say up to that, doesn't mean you actually get that. What does that actually mean? So focusing again on those with no service or poor service, the ones who are under 25.3, what that means is those people will struggle to be able to watch this testimony live right now without buffering. Those people will struggle to participate in teleconferences. Those people will struggle, or those businesses will struggle to send large files, to submit them to the state, to submit them to customers. So that's what that actually means in practice. This is the problem we're solving for Vermonters. Next slide, please. And so this is just to give you a broad picture of what's the need across the state. So we've divided this into communications union districts. So the colors you want to focus on is the dark blue, which is less than 4.1. Those are considered unserved, and the green, which is those who are at 4.1. And then the what's that, brown? The brown, that is showing the number of passings by CUD. So obviously EC Fiber has been at it a while. NEK Broadband has about 500. Maple Broadband has about 300 at the moment, and other CUDs are getting going. TV Fiber has a handful. So without this number of passings, the number of unserved in EC Fiber's territory would be far higher. But at the moment, we have about nearly 60,000 which remain unserved, underserved. That's about 19% of Vermonters. Next slide. And yeah, I won't talk too much about this one, but again, just to bring home the fact that we are governed by town representatives, and CUDs have small staffs that are supported by volunteers. It's a really good mix, and the skills that are brought to the table by the fact that we have volunteers from a wide variety of backgrounds is really, really valuable in terms of helping us as Team Vermont collaborate as across different CUDs within Vacuda, and just helps the strength of each CUD to accomplish this this challenging but achievable goal. And that's for me. So I'd like to introduce you now to Krista Schutz from NEK Broadband.
Thanks, Ellie. So thank you for the opportunity, Madam Chair and committee members, really appreciate that. I'm here to help you understand what we have done and a way to help you understand what all of us are doing and will be doing. We, besides EC Fiber, were the first CUD to bring service to customers at the end of 2021 as part of 2 CARES grants that we received. So we stood up in a very short period of time by coming together with our partners. So I'm just going to give you a little context for NEK Broadband and what we face. And then I'm going to talk to you about what we're actually doing to get this up and done. When we talk about those unserved addresses, those people that don't have 4.1, where it's like dial-up, where they probably can't actually watch this video on YouTube, they certainly can't participate. Those addresses in the Northeast Kingdom represents 40%. So of all of the addresses in the state of Vermont that are unserved, 40% of those addresses are in the kingdom. 10% of the state's population is in the kingdom, right? So there's quite a disparity there. Overall, we represent 33% of the unserved and underserved addresses, and we have approximately 30% of the roads. The other challenge, and this speaks to the affordability issue, is that we're also, in addition to being the most rural area, we also have the lowest income, median income issue. And that becomes a challenge when you're talking about take rates. Take rate is when somebody takes the service, and what's the rate of people that are taking the service. When you're poor, you have generally you're going to make a choice between cellular and broadband. You're not going to be able to afford both. And cellular gives you broadband, but also gives you mobility. So there are some affordability issues that we need to address so that they can have true broadband in their homes to participate in school, to participate in work, et cetera. So the kingdom is built out of 55 towns, and Wolcott is also part of our district. In those 56 towns, just to get to the unserved, this is not going to serve the served, but to get to the unserved, we're talking about a 2,800 mile build. And that's about $196 million. So it's not a small project, and it will take time. If you think about the context of that, EC Fiber generally got up to around 300 miles per year. I think that's
Never quite got there.
okay, almost 300 miles per year. So at 400 miles per year, we're looking at a 7-year build. Now, are we pushing for 5 years like everyone is? Absolutely. The contracts we negotiate have 60 miles a month for construction. We're putting make-ready applications in at that rate. So we will do our best to get there. You just want us to be realistic about what's involved and how big the scope of the project is. So a couple of items I mentioned, we've gotten fiber to over 500 premises that didn't have service through a couple of different grants. The other piece that's really important is this project is people. So yes, we rely on volunteers, and we have a lot of really talented people that volunteers. We have over 151 board members and all of their alternates. So it's a lot of board members. They focus on working groups that focus on communications, technology, and affordability, because those are the issues that are really key. But we can't do this based on volunteers. We have to grow our staff and our capacity. So in 2021, we had 1 employee. In 2022, we had 3 employees. So we had an accounting and grants manager and communications. And in 2023, we've just added on 2 more and have another employee that will be coming on in about a month and a half. So we've added in operations and we've added in GIS specialists, because this is all about mapping. Everything we do is about mapping. So I'd like to move to the next slide, please. So this visual is really meant to provide sort of the idea of the steps that are involved in building a project. And so the first step it's important to understand the context, and that's where we learn what does it take to get to every grid, every utility, every address that has electric utility service. What does it take to get there? And that's your 2,800 miles. And then what does it take to get funding? So we're eligible for 30% of the existing monies that have gone in. That means up to $65 million, which is 33% of the $196 million. There will be additional funds that come in through BEAD, and there's work to be done around that. So we have a long way to go. We have applied to the USDA Rural Utility Service for a $23.5 million application for Essex County, where there are less than 5 people per square mile. So people, not premises, per square mile, not linear mile, to try and overcome the most difficult part of our business case. It was a tremendous lift to do the project, to do the application, and with any luck, we'll find out by March whether or not we've gotten that. To do that, and this is an important issue relative to the BEAD funds as well, to do that, we have to have matching funds. Matching funds cannot be federal funds. You can't match a federal project with a federal grant. So for the Reconnect, we were able to get a loan approved from VEDA, the Vermont Economic Development Authority, through their broadband loan expansion program, which is $4 million plus an additional $1 million. So that $5 million plus a letter of credit from our bank, Community National Bank, serves as the 25% match to this application that we've put in. But those funds come at a price. There's an advantage. We don't have to pay them for 3 years, either interest or principal. So that is an important ramp that gives us some breathing room. But we're still playing just about market rate. There's a little bit of buy down there, but not much. And so that cost is going to be on top of that $196 million, right? So every time we have to borrow at an interest rate, we're adding costs into the project. So the other pieces that I want to point out, like the crowd fiber, that's where people can pre-register. We have 1,700 people pre-registered. This is where our grassroots is going to come into play, getting towns to get out there and get people to register. And that's going to play a role in where we go. Right now, we're building our backbone infrastructure across the entire district first for reliability, for redundancy, so that that's the first reason. And the second reason is so that the entire district has an equal footing in terms of getting access to broadband. The second piece is we're focusing on the unserved, those who don't even have 4.1, those who are basically stuck in the dial-up world. So that is an important part. So we're branching off of our backbone to do those. We're branching off of our backbone to do priority underserved addresses where towns have provided some ARPA funds. So that's kind of our current piece that we're working on. We have 115 miles that's under construction right now. We have 165 miles of make ready that's been approved. And in our Senate testimony this morning, we took a little bit of time to talk about make ready to just help people understand what that is, because it's such an enormous part of the project that's in front of us. So make ready is the work that you do to make the utility poles ready to put the fiber on. Putting the fiber on is kind of the easy part once that piece is done. But the utility poles really have a challenge. And in some places, there are more challenges than others. So with our investor-owned utility like Green Mountain Power, they have an incentive to keep their plant up to date. That's kind of how they make their money, right? But with our cooperatives and with our municipals, it's much more difficult. The budgets that they create and how they manage their utilities can be different. But even more so, it was so hard to get electrification to these rural areas that many times the poles just went right through fields. You didn't run up a road and down a road, you took the hypotenuse and ran straight across. Well, guess what? Those fields, they're not fields anymore. So they're generally woods. They can be, you see it in the outages that we experienced in the recent storm. Some utilities have done better than others at keeping those up to date. But those off-road, which WEC, Washington Electric Co-op, 60% off-road, Lindenville Electric, 60% off-road. So that means that to get out and fix that pole, you have to be in a vehicle that can get out there and do that work. That's very expensive. Most of those poles wind up needing to be replaced. That takes a long time. There's a long lead time involved in that. Then you have to construct out there. That's very expensive. Then you have to maintain out there. So there are some challenges that we're seeing inside of the make ready world that increase time, but they also increase cost. It would figuring out how to address those and looking at some of those federal funds is an important avenue. The other pieces, permits and licenses, you can have the make ready done, but we have to cross the interstate. That's V-Trans. Can't do that between now and in November and April 15th. Without an exception. You have railroad permits, you have wetland permits, you have local zoning. You have a lot of different permitting pieces that go into play that you've got to keep going to get going. The construction and inspection. So we use National Rural Telecommunications Cooperative as our construction manager. They manage our construction company, which is Eustis. And that they then do all of the inspections. Really important to inspect the work that's being done, making sure it's what you think it is. And the equipment, OLTs and cabinets, and the installations, those are done by our partner, Waitsfield Champlain Valley Telecom. One of the,
OLT.
oh, sorry, thank you very much. So OLT is what we refer to our cabinets as, and it stands for the optical line terminal. And you have those in your cabinet, and then you have what we refer to as an ONT inside of the house. That's an optical network terminal. And those two things are what speaks together and transmits the light, which transmits the information, which gives you high-speed internet. So those cabinets, will have about 23 cabinets spread across the kingdom for that piece. So what does all of this mean? It means there's a long time that it takes to get from when you start a project to when that project's actually being lit up in that town. We'll have touched 90% of the towns in the Northeast Kingdom within the next 2 years, building our backbone, building those spurs to the unserved. But it is going to take time to get to the remainder. Material, we have warehouses in St. Johnsbury and Brighton, and that's we're carrying about $4.7 million in material. We don't have a cost of money right now because of the grants. So we were able to get long lead time items pre-purchase and keep that going. And the logistics folks that we bring on board are important for that. Next slide. So what do we need to be successful? One of the items that we need is continuity of support, right? We have a good thing going here. We've created public infrastructure that has public accountability. That's really important in these rural areas. When we invest in this infrastructure, we have the opportunity to take any money that comes out of those revenues and invest it, as Ellie and FX were saying earlier, invest that back into those communities. So it goes into building more infrastructure out and getting to the end of the line, or it goes into affordability programs to help those. The digital divide is massive, and it's massive in the Northeast Kingdom. I had a teacher just last week, a French teacher, say to me, it was been really tough to see the difference between the students that have had broadband, and the students that have not coming out of the pandemic, because we can see how much education some of them just didn't get. And that's what's happened. And that's what we're solving for. So that affordability issue is just a super critical piece that we've got to address. And we're not going to address it by lowering our overall pricing structure. We can't. We have to be able to go to the revenue bond market in order to succeed. We have to be able to maintain these pieces. But what we can do is set up structures that give us the ability to bridge that. And part of that is monetary, and part of that is education. So it is, it's an incredible privilege to be working on something that can have this much of an impact. We had one of our very first customers, we attached it. She cried because she had been driving a long ways to go and take her college classes, and would now, for the first time, be able to take them at home. Another company that was a bakery that can take orders now. So a big impact. And I guess the last piece is around the workforce. I can't emphasize, thank you very much. I cannot underemphasize how important workforce development is going to be. We have the workforce we need right now in the Northeast Kingdom. Our contract calls for 95% of the people that work on our project to reside in the Northeast Kingdom, which we can do because Eustis actually employs a lot of people out in the Northeast Kingdom. We have $42 billion coming into this country for broadband. Everybody is going to want workers. And the price we all know how the economics work, right? When the demand for those workers goes up and the ability to fill those slots goes down, we are going to lose people. We need to not only think about how are we developing a workforce here, but how are we retaining the workforce that we have? And we hope to do part of that by helping them understand how they're helping their neighbors and that they can be a part of this historic infrastructure build. So that piece is important. It's going to be necessary in the make ready, in the construction, in installation, in customer service. All of those areas is going to become increasingly scarce from what it is today. So. with
Thank you.
that, happy to-
Thank you for your testimony. Do members have questions for any of the witnesses? Representative Morris.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for coming in today with your emotional testimony. That's great. I love that you have passion behind it. That's what makes it work. 196 million for 2,800 plus miles. Wow. How far are we into the program and how much more additional funding do you envision that you're going to need to accomplish that last mile? 196 million. Where are we into that program?
So with the construction funds that we have that have come through the legislature to date, right? So that's what exists in the Vermont Community Broadband Fund to date. The NEK broadband brings down 30.09% of those funds, which is $65 million. So that's 33% of the 196. We anticipate a minimum of $100 million coming in from BEAD and an unknown amount of money that will be in addition to the base amount that every state gets. BEAD is the Broadband Equity and Deployment program that's part of the federal infrastructure bill. The NEK put a lot of effort into the FCC challenge process to try and increase the amount that would come to Vermont because our area was sort of poorly represented in terms of the in terms of reality, in terms of how many were actually there. But that's going to be a tough lift. So we expect some funds from that. We're going to work our hardest to get a reconnect fund with that 23.5 million. So, all told, even if we get grants that other CUDs may not be eligible for because they don't have the 5 people per mile problem, we're still just looking at 50% of the issue. So from that, we have to either keep getting more grant funding to address it. We have to go after the least cost, lowest interest rate borrowing that we can. I think I mentioned, although I might have blurred it with the other one, that we have a VITA loan. There are structures for revolving loan programs that have 0%. And ultimately, our revenue is what we'll use to get to that end game. And that's what our business models are based on and look at.
Thank you for that. It's probably a sensitive subject and funding always, but I'm kind of envisioning as other CUDs come online and meet their goals of providing that last mile, that some other funding, the funding will become more available. You think that's a fair assessment?
Let me take a crack at that. With EC Fiber, it's all municipal revenue bonds. And our bond banker has said, you've set the stage. When the other CUDs need to go to the municipal bond market, they're not going to have 3 years of audited financials because you guys have shown the way. So there's a path now, but it's a complicated path, and it's not something that they need to engage in, this year or next year or maybe even 3 years with the money that we have right now. Figure we have 250. At least another 100 million coming in is 350. The whole problem might take 500 to 700 million to solve, depending on labor issues and
700
materials.
plus.
700 plus.
Definitely.
But so let's say 700, right? We know we have 350. That means the other 50% is going to have to be municipal revenue bonds. So, or other instrumentalities. But at the end of the day, we know for certain, there's no question that municipal revenue bonds are an instrument that can be used.
Yeah, we also, I think I spoke last time about the
I
100.
think you'll need to introduce yourself for the record.
Christine Hope was the executive director of the Community Broadband Board. And we also have applied for a $114 million middle mile grant. And we've challenged 43,000 additional addresses with the FCC. We're meeting with the FCC. This is all important because each one of these addresses could be an incremental another $5,000 per address for the state. So not saying we're going to get all those 43,000, but we do have plans in place to aggressively go after additional grants.
Sure, Representative Sibilia.
I just want to highlight in this moment for the committee why we've landed in this place with fiber to the premise. That is two things we've talked about: universality. So these CUDs have to make sure there's a plan to build to everyone, and accountability. They are accountable. And why is it fiber? In terms of universality, it's wire that guarantees universality. We have seen a number of wireless, fixed wireless, cellular projects. They're not universal, and they cannot guarantee it. And their speed is not consistent, cannot be guaranteed along all of those addresses. Wireless, fixed wireless can be cheaper. It's also, but it doesn't get to everyone. And so what happens if you put in that kind of a project, make it exponentially, which we've done in some places, more expensive for those that are not covered. So we've seen some of that. I just wanted to highlight.
I think one of the things to think about is that fiber in its fiber can go, and it can go at the speed of light, right? So then you put equipment on it so that it can work inside of the home, so that it can connect to your network operations. And that equipment becomes the limiter on speed. But what happens is equipment keeps on going. The nice thing is that despite where we are today, which gives us a gig, which gives us 10 gigs, I mean, 1,000 megabytes per second compared to what we have today, it seems like it's going to be plenty. But the good news is that the fiber can go into the future as the equipment becomes better, can process more efficiently. We'll get up into even higher and higher speeds. And that means just replacing that equipment out, which is in our business plans for every 7 years in any event. So we're really sort of future-proofing when we invest in that fiber infrastructure.
And the other very small point is that 7-year replacement is a tiny, tiny fraction. It's very small. I don't know percent off the top of my head, but it's tiny. So to keep the infrastructure up to date and future proof, it's tiny incremental investments. This really is a once-off investment.
Yeah, let me clear a couple of myths about it. The wireless doesn't work in Vermont, because things like hills, right? Wireless can't penetrate hills. So, and the more speed you want with wireless, you have to go up in frequency, which means it penetrates even less. So if it's really the bottom line in Vermont, if it's not fiber, it's not broadband. Satellite, let me clarify satellite, because I know I've heard some people talk about that today. I've been running Starlink satellite at my house for 2 years. The satellite is also limited in terms of its bandwidth because it uses radio frequency to transmit to the satellites. So if you look 2 years ago when I installed this thing, the Starlink tells you get 300 megabits download. Now we're only getting 30 because of all the people that have come on during the day. You can get it 300 at 2 or 3 in the morning. So, and also they've now got data caps on satellite. So fiber is, if anybody tells you anything else, have them come see me.
I think the data caps have been a huge issue. We hear about that all the time. It's like, well, yeah, I can get this, but you have no idea how expensive this is for me to just actually do day-to-day activities once I hit those data caps, and just to keep on adding on to that. So
Yeah, think about the impact of low income folks.
And just while we're on the subject of fiber, fiber's been around since the early 70s.
Yes.
And it looks like you put up a strand of fiber, you have a very good chance that 50 years later, it's still going to be delivering for you. And that's, that means that some of these networks that they're building, it might be 100 years before a segment needs to be replaced. That's actually a possibility. They really don't know at this point how long the fiber will last.
So I'm curious about your sort of procurement process in how you are getting contractors to do the actual construction work and how the bid process works. I assume it's a competitive bid, but I'd love to hear a little bit about that.
Yeah, we follow a procurement process that each CUD has their own procurement regulation policies that it puts in place. Two, we follow federal regulations because we're using federal grants. So if a project is under $10,000, then it has to have at least 2 bids in order to spend that grant funding. If a project is over $250,000, it has to be done in an open RFP process. Typically, we do an RFP process, sub the 250,000. We often really just use this 2-bid opportunity if we need to move quickly and we can get a couple of competing bids to make sure we keep the pricing down. We always have a team that is reviewing the bids so that there are multiple people that have reviewed all of the bids that come in. We post them publicly on different bid boards with the state and with our biggest ones that are our key ones, we really sort of advertised and went after, proactively identify folks ahead of time and then be able to send them to them directly. So that's our process.
I think the only thing I'd add to that is just an example. When we did our construction bid, we sent out to approaching 30 different firms just to make sure that we got as many potential respondents as possible.
And how many did you get?
We got 2 bids.
So is it, I guess it's 2 bids between 10,000 and 250 are required?
So you have to have a minimum of 2 companies that are providing pricing for the service that you're looking for.
Yeah. But
Yeah.
between $10,000 of contract dollars and 250,000.
That's correct.
2. Okay. And then above that, it's open. It has to be more.
I think there are very rare instances where we've only used 2. I mean, generally we try and, put it out to anybody we know that's in the business, whether it's poll surveys. We did a poll survey RFP that was posted. We had 7 respondents. So, it was very competitive. It was based on a point structure when things came in and it was blind. So, but sometimes, you put it out and it's like, you've got something that's just a small thing and you need it to move quickly and you identify a couple of local subcontractors that can do the work and you get quotes from them so they know they're bidding against other people, which gives you accountability towards the money, but you're not spending. A bid process takes a long time, right? You've got to build that RFP, you've got to post it, then it's got to be out there, then you've got to award it, and then you've got a contract for it. So we just try to balance those pieces and be responsible for it and report to our executive committees and our finance committees.
And I just want to note that the Vermont Community Broadband Board had Guidehouse put together a presentation overview of uniform guidance for the CUDs. We could send that to you as well so that you're familiar with that.
Who's Guidehouse, Madam Chair? Who's Guidehouse?
Who is Guidehouse?
Do you want to answer that, Christine?
Yeah, Guidehouse is the firm that's the administration is contracted with to ensure we're complying with all the requirements of the grant programs, ARPA and then now looking at BEAD.
So they've provided training to the CUDs to, ensure that we're meeting all those pieces. For example, our grant requires that any contract that's more than $25,000 be reviewed by the attorney for the district to ensure that it's met all of the grant requirements, such as the procurement process, et cetera.
Great, thank you. Representative Stebbins.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Is there a time certain by which, if you have your house built, you're in the map, the GIS map, and then, if someone is working on a new home, that is going to be built in 6 months, are they part of your last mile? Like, where's that cutoff? Because we also, we're also talking about sustainability and fragmentation and you build the house. I think it was Representative Pat who was like, if you keep building the last mile, it keeps going for more development. So just wondering how you structure that. You asked. You didn't say it like that, but you asked.
I'll take that because we're running into that now. In the first town that we built out extensively was Barnard, and we now, and when we did that, everything was on a shoestring, and so we built basically bare bones. And we now have some locations where we don't have enough fiber to account for the new construction that's happened. So that is that's an issue that we have because we couldn't afford to build it properly from the beginning. So we're hoping we might be able to get some of the construction fund money to help us go back and redo that, because quite frankly, if some of those places that we don't have enough fibers for, they're effectively unserved, even though the map says they're served 100. Right? So there's that kind of issue, as well as what does the last mile mean if somebody can go another mile down the road, build a house, have the electric utility put lines down there, which would then, in theory, obligate the district to put a line of fiber down there, and to serve them. And is that in the public interest? And does that tie, is that what we want to have happening? And all these issues go, I think, in the generational picture towards the fact that this broadband infrastructure that we're building, I think it's going to help Vermont stay Vermont as our population doubles because of climate, right? Because we're going to have the ability to connect as communities. We're going to have this community owned, and controlled asset that we can deploy in the service of the community. And I think your question is super important, and it ties back into a lot of things. The last thing I would note is that we also face situations where, the simple fact is that people are in situations where not only do they have affordability issues, but they have triple affordability issues because they're in a manufactured home, which the state requires that the utilities go underground. And while an electric company or a phone company or a cable company, they're copper cables, they can just throw them in a slit in the ground. Fiber's more delicate. It's got to be 2 feet down. It's got to be in conduit, and that's expensive. And so what do we do when we tell people, okay, you can have a manufactured home to live in, or we're going to build a manufactured home neighborhood to do something about affordable housing? If we don't also say you've got to put the conduit in for fiber when you're doing that build, that's doing is creating another affordability issue.
Yeah, let me add that the VCBB position is that, and actually it's out of Act 71. We're required to provide fiber optic 100 by 100 service to every address that's on the electric grid. So if the electric grid builds out, we're going to provide them the fiber optic service, because fiber, if you look today, you look at it's about water, sewer, electricity, and broadband. So we are committed to get to every address that's on the
In
network.
perpetuity.
I think that, yeah, and I think the other point that's really important, and the policy that is been put in place by the Vermont Community Broadband Board is around capacity, right? So we build out with 25% capacity in our line. So we have the ability to do that because of grant funding that EC Fiber didn't have in their initial build out when they were really bootstrapping it. We also put 3 extra tubes of fiber, a tube of a tube includes 12 strands. So we put extra fibers into our backbone for a variety of reasons. And the other point that I wanted to make was around that housing piece, and not only in the mobile home parks, but when we're building multifamily housing, we should be requiring that they're putting conduit that we can run fiber through to get to each of those individual units in the same way that we're running electrical. It is orders of magnitude less expensive to do that up front. And we are happy to cover the conduit costs for any project. We also work with our towns and their representatives in the select boards to know when areas are going in or when people have gone in for construction permits. We also work with the electric utilities for when they're putting underground in someplace so that we can try and get in at the same time. GMP in particular has been really good about calling up and saying, not necessarily with the greatest amount of, upfront notice, but always in enough time for us to get in there and put the conduit in at the same time that they are. Really saves costs that are important down the line, especially because our housing crisis is severe. And frankly, it's going to get more severe the more broadband we have, because we're going to have more climate refugees who are going to be able to purchase housing. So.
Right. Thank you, Representative Torrey.
Thank you. Just a couple of questions. When you mentioned the difficulty with the off-road poles, I just was wondering if you cost share with the electric utilities when upgrades are needed?
So the way that it works right now is that if when you get to the pole, it is already out of code, then that pole is the responsibility of the electric utility / communications utility. If when you get to the pole, it is in code, but to put your fiber onto the pole, it's going to be out of code, then you're responsible for replacing the entire pole. So the challenge with that is that entire pole replacement that is, being borne on the cost of the communications union district, but is sometimes the case is that pole has already been fully depreciated, should have been replaced. So that can be a challenge, but technically meets code.
Yeah, that's all. There's a Vermont regulation called PUC Rule 3700 that spells all that out in it.
Oh,
So
okay.
Vermont has a
3.700.
3.700. Yeah.
And I would say that, DC Fiber, we mostly deal with Green Mountain Power, and we've been at this for a long time, but I've started to understand from talking with the other CUDs that they're getting charged the full cost. And that's not my understanding of the rule as it was written in law or as it was worked out. And I was involved in all of those discussions back in 2019, that it should be, if a pole gets replaced, to put it in code, that benefits everybody who's on that pole. So it should be spread across all of the attachers and owners proportionally. So this is an area where VCUDA is playing an important role, because we can bring together all the CUDs and we can sit down with the pole owning utilities and say, do your cost estimators get this? Do you even get this? Right? So that's an interesting thing that's going on in the background. Nothing that requires any kind of legislative action, but just something, I think, to give a little color to some of the complexity.
And it could be an open question as to whether it requires legislative action, maybe.
Possibly. We'll let you know.
We had a run of 200 poles up in Canaan, for example, that required 58 of them had to be replaced. Now, a lot of those were on Vermont Electric Co-op, and that eats into their pole budget, right? But that and into CCI. And then we had another section in in the Lindenville electric area, and it was 22 poles, and almost all of them are on us. And so that's, we're taking a hard look at whether or not we're going to run down that line right now, and whether or not we invest in a different line and hope that eventually that line gets up to speed. So it is going to play a role for us anyway, because we have a lot of miles to get covered. It's going to play a role in where we go.
We have a section as well. It's about a third of a mile on Route 74 in Shoreham, and it's literally cheaper for us to bury that than it is to do all the pole replacements that are required. And that's, as you know from the last time, it's about 4 or 5 times as expensive to bury as it is to go aerially on average, right?
But it is actually more possible in Addison County than
Right.
some
Exactly,
sections.
exactly. And we're relatively lucky. Yeah.
That's true. And in the EC fiber area, Green Mountain Power is aggressively moving poles,
Yeah.
so-called easement poles, poles that cut across fields. They're aggressively getting them out of the fields and putting them on the right of way of the roads. And this is creating all of this unexpected expense coming at us. Because
Except for
now-
us, it's creating a reduction in expense.
Right. Well, but for us, it's all because we put this stuff on the poles, and now we have to run new fiber down the poles, and then we have to redo the connections, and God knows what connections we might have out in the distance. But the great thing is we got to get these poles out of those fields. I think all of you remember that terrible thing with the cows that happened a few years ago with one of the subcontractors who was working on EC fiber. Those poles were marching across 4 miles of fields. Why? Because back in the 1930s, when it first got electrified, materials were much more expensive than labor. So you got to preserve materials. You got to take the straightest path. That's why those poles go marching across the field. Right now, it's the opposite. So the sooner we can get those poles out of the fields and the woods and onto the road right-of-ways, the better off we'll be.
Right. Thank you so much for your testimony. It was really edifying, and also it's just for all your effort. I know this is a big deal. It's great to hear.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having us. Appreciate it.
Members, any final thoughts before we turn for the day?
Are we expecting to take any action on broadband this year? Or being asked to, or are there bills related to broadband this year?
Right, we did just budget adjustment act. We did, I guess you would say.
Oh, okay.
But
Besides that,
not
nothing.
specific.
Okay,
It's the largest
just
public
curious.
infrastructure project going on in the state.
yeah, it's
And a new committee.
right. Yeah, no, but it's been amazing to learn about it and be able to keep tabs on what's going on.
Yeah.
But it was just, didn't sound like they were making any requests. That's
No.
what I was trying to.